I bought this cabin for the quiet, for the absolute soul-crushing silence that only 100 acres of ancient forest can provide. No neighbors, no internet, just me and the rustling leaves. That was the dream, anyway. I pictured myself reading by the fire, maybe chopping some wood, finally escaping the city's endless drone. It was perfect. For the first few weeks, it was everything I'd hoped for. The air was crisp, the stars were a blanket I'd never seen before, and the only sounds were the wind and the distant cry of an owl. But then things started to change. Small things at first. A cupboard door left ajar when I swore I'd closed it. A faint smell of wood smoke when I hadn't lit the hearth all day. I dismissed them, of course, blamed my own forgetfulness, the quirks of an old house settling. Until last night. That's when I heard the breathing. And it wasn't mine. The breathing. It was slow, deliberate, a rhythmic inhale and exhale that cut through the oppressive silence of my bedroom. My heart didn't just beat, it hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum trying to break free. Every muscle in my body locked up. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the sound was coming somewhere in the room. Not right next to me, but close enough that I could feel the vibrations in the air. Or maybe that was just my own trembling. It was deep, almost guttural, like someone sleeping heavily, but with a slight wet catch on the exhale. Human, I thought, but wrong. Too loud, too present for someone who wasn't supposed to be there. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation. An animal? No, I knew the sounds of the forest. This wasn't an owl, or a deer, or even a bear. This was something that belonged in a house, but not this house, not with me. It sounded like it was standing, or sitting, just beyond the foot of my bed. The darkness was absolute, thick enough to suffocate, and I couldn't see a thing. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the black, searching for any outline, any shift in the shadows. Nothing, just the breathing. I held my own breath, trying to make myself disappear, to become as small and silent as possible. My lungs burned, demanding air, but I couldn't risk making a sound. What if it heard me? What if it knew I was awake? The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through me, a cold wave that left me shivering despite the warmth of the blankets. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, as if blinking would somehow reset the nightmare. It didn't. The breathing continued, steady, unwavering, a constant reminder that I was not alone. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. I could feel the sweat trickling down my temples, pooling in my hair. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside became amplified, distorted into something sinister. Was that a floorboard groaning under weight, or just the house settling? The line between reality and my escalating panic blurred until I couldn't tell what was real and what was a figment of my terrified imagination. Then the breathing stopped, abruptly, no fading out, no final sigh, just gone. The silence that followed was worse, far worse than the breathing itself. It was a vacuum, an emptiness that screamed of presence, of watchful waiting. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Had it left, or was it just holding its breath too, listening for me? My body was screaming at me to move, to run, to hide, but I was paralyzed, a deer caught in headlights, unable to break free from the invisible snare. I lay there rigid for what felt like hours. My ears ached from the effort of listening, straining for any sound, any sign. The darkness pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Eventually, the first slivers of dawn began to paint the sky a bruised purple outside my window. The blackness in my room softened to a deep gray, and slowly, agonizingly, shapes began to emerge. The dresser, the armchair, the outline of the door, and then the foot of my bed. Empty, nothing. I didn't dare move until the sun was fully up, streaming through the window, painting golden rectangles on the floor. Only then, with the light as my shield, did I slowly, cautiously swing my legs out of bed. Every muscle protested, stiff from tension. My head throbbed. I walked to the bedroom door, my steps slow and deliberate, my eyes scanning every inch of the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The closet door was closed, the windows were latched. I crept into the living room, then the kitchen. The faint smell of wood smoke was gone, replaced by the stale air of a house that had been closed up. The cupboard door was closed. Everything was exactly as I had left it. It was as if the entire night had been a cruel hallucination, a product of my isolated mind finally cracking. I almost wanted to believe it. Almost. But I knew what I had heard. It was too real, too visceral to be a dream. The memory of that deep, wet breath was burned into my mind. I went to the front door, unbolted it, and stepped onto the porch, taking a deep, shaky breath of the crisp morning air. The forest stood silent, majestic, but now it felt different. It felt like it was watching me. I decided then and there that I needed to find out. I couldn't live in this cabin, in this beautiful, terrifying solitude, if I was going to be haunted by unseen presences. I grabbed my hunting knife, not that I'd ever used it for anything but opening stubborn packaging, and started a systematic search of the cabin. Every cupboard, every corner, under every rug. Nothing. My heart began to slow its frantic rhythm, a sliver of relief pushing through the lingering dread. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe the old house really did make strange noises. Then I got to the attic. I hadn't really explored it yet, just glanced up the pull-down stairs when I first moved in. It was dark, dusty, filled with cobwebs. I pulled down the ladder, a cloud of dust puffing out. I flicked on my flashlight and slowly ascended. The air up there was thick, musty, smelling of old wood and something else. Something faintly organic, like damp earth mixed with dried leaves. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating forgotten trunks, piles of old newspapers, and the skeletal remains of what looked like a rocking horse. And then, in the far corner, near a small, grimy window, I saw it. A small, carefully constructed pile of twigs and dried leaves, arranged in a crude circle. And in the center of the circle, placed with unsettling precision, was a single, freshly fallen raven's feather. It wasn't dusty. It looked like it had been placed there very recently. And next to it, partially obscured by a loose floorboard, was a small, hand-carved wooden doll. Its eyes were two tiny black pebbles staring blankly ahead. Its mouth was a simple, unsettlingly wide slit. My blood ran cold again. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't the house settling. This was deliberate. This was a message, and it was waiting for me. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the doll, on the feather, on that carefully arranged circle. The silence of the attic felt heavier, colder now. I wasn't just hearing things. Someone or something was here. And it wasn't just visiting. It was making itself at home. It was watching me. The doll, its eyes, those tiny black pebbles, seemed to bore into me, even in the dim light of my flashlight. The wide, unsettling slit of a mouth. It wasn't just old. It felt observed, like it was watching me. My heart was a frantic woodpecker against my ribs, echoing the rapid pulse in my ears. This wasn't dust bunnies or settling wood. This was intention. This was a presence, a deliberate, malicious presence. My mind screamed at me to run, to bolt down the ladder, out the door, and never look back. But my feet felt cemented to the dusty floorboards. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the doll, from the perfectly arranged circle of twigs and leaves, from that single, pristine raven's feather. It was a message, all right, a clear, undeniable declaration that I was not alone, that my cabin, my sanctuary, was already occupied. I took a shaky step backward, then another, my flashlight beam trembling.
The doll seemed to grow larger, its blank stare more accusing, more knowing. The air grew colder, or maybe that was just the icy tendrils of fear coiling around my spine. I could almost feel eyes on me, not just the doll's, but something else, something unseen, lurking in the shadows of the attic. Was it still here? Had it been here all along, watching me discover its little altar? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Finally, I managed to turn, fumbling for the ladder. My hands were shaking so badly I almost missed the rungs. I descended slowly, carefully, my eyes still darting back to the corner where the doll sat. I half expected to see it move, to see those pebble eyes blink or that slit mouth widen into a grin. But it remained still, a silent, unsettling sentinel. The moment my feet hit the solid floor of the hallway below, I practically scrambled, yanking the pull-down stairs back into the ceiling with a violent thud. It didn't feel like I was securing the attic, it felt like I was trapping myself in the rest of the house with whatever was in there. The silence of the house pressed in on me again, but now it was a different kind of silence, no longer peaceful but heavy, expectant. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the floorboards became a warning. I clutched the hunting knife, my knuckles white. It felt utterly useless. What good was a knife against something that could breathe unseen in my bedroom, something that left dolls and feathers in my attic? I walked through the house, my senses on high alert. Every rustle outside sounded like footsteps. Every faint whisper of the windows sounded like a breath. My mind was racing, trying to process, to make sense of the utterly senseless. Who would do this? Why? Was it a prank? Some local kids? No, the remoteness of the cabin, the deliberate nature of the arrangement, the breathing. This wasn't kids. This was something else. Something older, perhaps. Something not human. My phone, a dead weight in my pocket, was useless. No signal. I was truly alone, trapped. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. There was no one to call, no one to tell, no one to come and help. I was in this by myself. The quiet I had craved had become my prison. I found myself back in the bedroom, staring at the foot of my bed, the spot where I imagined the breathing had come from. The sunlight, once a comforting shield, now felt like it was mocking me, illuminating an empty space that I knew, with every fiber of my being, was not truly empty. I walked over to the bed, my eyes scanning the floor, the walls, every inch of the room, as if the darkness had simply vanished, taking the proof with it. Then I saw it. On my bedside table, right next to the lamp, was a small, smooth gray stone. It hadn't been there when I went to bed last night. It hadn't been there when I woke up this morning. I knew it. My heart slammed against my ribs again. I picked it up. It was cold to the touch, perfectly smooth, like it had been worn by water for centuries. And on one side, etched crudely into its surface, was a single, unsettling symbol. It looked like a stick figure, but with overly long, spindly limbs and a head that was just a circle with two small dots for eyes, like the doll. My breath hitched. The doll, the feather, now this stone. It was escalating. The breathing was a warning. These were messages. They were telling me something. But what? My mind, usually so logical, was failing me. It was trying to construct a narrative, but all it could come up with was pure, unadulterated terror. I dropped the stone as if it had burned me. It clattered against the wooden table. The sound echoed too loudly in the silent room. I backed away, bumping into the dresser. This wasn't just a visitor anymore. This was a resident, and it was making itself known. It was playing with me. I needed to get out. I needed to leave. But where would I go? The nearest town was miles away, a good 2-hour hike through the woods, and I didn't even have a car. I'd left it in the nearest town for repairs, planning to walk back with supplies. My only way out was on foot, and the thought of walking through those woods, knowing what might be watching, what might be following, it was unbearable. I went to the window, peering out at the dense forest. The trees, once so majestic and inviting, now seemed to loom, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for me. Every shadow held a potential threat. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a bug under a magnifying glass. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to regain some semblance of composure. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the cold stone, the doll, the feather, the memory of that wet, guttural breathing, they were all too real. My eyes snapped open. I heard it again. A faint sound. Not breathing this time. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching. It seemed to come from the living room. My grip tightened on the useless knife. I moved slowly, cautiously, towards the sound. Each step felt like walking on glass. The scratching continued, a delicate, rhythmic rasping. It wasn't loud, but in the oppressive silence, it was deafening. I reached the doorway to the living room, peering around the frame. The room was bathed in sunlight, seemingly normal. The fireplace, the worn armchair, the small bookshelf, nothing out of place. Then I saw it. On the wooden mantelpiece, above the unlit fireplace where I usually kept a vase of wildflowers, was another one of those small gray stones. But this one was different. It wasn't smooth. It was rough, jagged, and on its surface, etched with painstaking precision, was a single word. A word that made the blood drain from my face and every hair on my body stand on end. Mine. It was carved deeply into the stone, almost gouged. And beneath it, not etched, but painted in a dark, viscous substance that looked sickeningly like dried blood, was the same spindly stick figure symbol, the one with the doll. I stumbled backward, a choked gasp escaping my lips. Mine. The cabin. This wasn't just a visit. This was a claim. It was telling me that I was trespassing, that I had invaded its territory. And the scratching? The scratching must have been it carving this message. It had been in the living room, right there, while I was in the bedroom trying to convince myself I was safe. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a terror so profound it stole my breath. It wasn't just watching me. It was interacting. It was leaving me messages, and it was doing it in broad daylight. It wasn't afraid of the sun. It wasn't afraid of me. I looked at the stone again, at the word mine, at the crude, blood-painted symbol. My cabin in the woods wasn't empty. It was very much occupied, and I was the intruder, and it wanted me to know. It wanted me to know that it was here, and that it wasn't leaving, and neither, it implied, was I. My eyes darted around the living room, then back to the mantelpiece. The fresh, dark stain of the symbol stood out starkly against the gray stone. It was a declaration, a threat, and I was utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. The silence of the cabin, once a comfort, was now a predatory stillness, waiting for my next move, waiting for me to understand, or perhaps waiting for me to break. And I felt myself very slowly beginning to crack.
The word mine burned into my vision, a brand on my soul. The crude stick figure, painted in that dark, viscous substance, seemed to pulse, to almost breathe on the cold stone. It wasn't just a threat, it was a violation. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just leaving trinkets. It was claiming ownership. Of the cabin, yes, but implicitly of me. I was trapped, a trespasser in my own home, in my own life. My breath hitched again, turning into a shallow, ragged thing. I couldn't tear my eyes from the mantelpiece. The sunlight, which moments ago felt like a mocking presence, now seemed to intensify the horror, highlighting every grotesque detail of that carved word, that painted symbol. It was so clear, so undeniable. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real.
This was happening. My hand still clutched the hunting knife, but it felt even more useless now, a child's toy against an invisible, omnipresent force. What could a blade do against something that could move through walls, leave messages, breathe in the darkness, and claim dominion over a place and a person? My mind screamed at me to run, to sprint out the door, into the woods and just keep going until my lungs burst or I collapsed. But the thought of those woods, the looming trees that now felt like 1,000 watchful eyes, was almost as terrifying as staying. And the nearest town, miles, too far. I was stuck, utterly, irrevocably stuck. My gaze flickered around the living room. Was it still here? Was it watching me now, relishing my terror? I imagined its presence, cold and unseen, just beyond my line of sight, a silent observer of my unraveling. The air suddenly felt heavy, thick with unseen expectation. I took a tentative step backward, then another, my eyes still locked on the mantelpiece. I bumped into the armchair, nearly losing my balance. My legs felt like jelly, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I needed to think, I needed a plan, but my mind was a jumbled mess of fear and adrenaline. I stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing a glass and filling it with water from the tap. My hand shook so violently that water sloshed over the rim, spilling onto the counter. I gulped it down, but it did nothing to quench the dryness in my throat, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. This thing wasn't going to leave. It had made that abundantly clear. It wanted me out, or something else. The thought of something else sent a fresh wave of ice through me. What did it want? Did it want to play, to torment, or something far more sinister? I leaned against the counter, trying to steady myself, trying to force some semblance of logic into my panicked brain. The breathing, the doll, the feather, the stones, the mine. It was a progression. It was getting closer, bolder. It was testing my limits. I looked out the kitchen window into the dense forest. The sun was higher now, filtering through the canopy, painting dappled patterns on the forest floor. It looked peaceful, idyllic even. But I knew better. It was a lie. The forest was a labyrinth, a dark heart, and it was watching me. I had to get out. I had to. Even if it meant walking for hours, days. I couldn't stay here, not with that thing, not with its silent, terrifying claims. I just needed to grab a few things, my backpack, some water, my phone. Even if it was useless for calls, maybe I could use it as a light. I walked back through the living room, forcing myself not to look at the mantelpiece. But my eyes betrayed me, darting to the stone.
Mine. It was a taunt, a sneer. I made my way to the bedroom, my movements stiff and jerky. I grabbed my worn hiking backpack from the closet, stuffing in a water bottle, a few granola bars, and my phone. As I reached for my jacket, I noticed something on the floor near the bedpost. It was a small, crudely drawn picture on the back of an old, yellowed receipt that must have fallen out of my jacket pocket. It was the stick figure again, the spindly limbs, the pebble eyes.
But this time, it wasn't alone. It was standing next to another figure, a smaller one, and it had its arm around it, almost possessively. The smaller figure, I realized with a jolt that sent a cold wave through my stomach, was unmistakably me. The way it was drawn, the rough outline of my clothes, the specific way I'd tied my hair that morning. It was me. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just in the attic. This wasn't just on the mantelpiece. It had been in my bedroom. While I was in the kitchen, while I was trying to calm myself, it had been here, right here. And it had drawn a picture of us. The air in the room seemed to congeal, becoming thick and suffocating. This wasn't just a message, it was a personal invasion. It knew what I looked like. It had been close enough to observe me, to see the details of my appearance. It had been in my personal space, leaving its mark. I dropped the receipt as if it were a burning coal. My heart was a frantic bird trying to beat its way out of my chest. It wasn't just here, it was with me. It was in my space. It was observing me. The thought was so profoundly disturbing that a low, guttural sound escaped my throat, a choked whimper of pure terror. I scrambled away from the bed, bumping into the dresser. My eyes darted around the room, searching, desperately searching for any sign, any shadow, any flicker of movement. But there was nothing. Just the silence. The heavy, watchful silence. It knew me. It had seen me. And it had drawn me. It was playing with me, yes, but this felt different, more intimate, more possessive. The word mine echoed in my head, taking on a new, far more sinister meaning. I had to get out, now. Forget the water, forget the granola bars, just get out. I grabbed my jacket, fumbling with the zipper with shaking hands. As I pulled it on, my hand brushed against something in the inner pocket. I pulled it out. Another stone, smaller than the one on the bedside table, smoother. And on it, in the same blood-like substance, was another symbol. Not the stick figure this time. It was a single, perfectly formed, blood-red teardrop. My stomach lurched. A teardrop? Why a teardrop? Was it mocking my fear? Or was it a warning, a prelude to sorrow? I dropped the stone. It hit the floor with a soft thud, rolling under the bed. I didn't care. I couldn't care. I needed to move. I practically ran out of the bedroom, through the living room, avoiding the mantelpiece with every fiber of my being, and to the front door. My hands fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers slick with sweat. It took me 3 tries to unlock it. I yanked the door open, practically falling out onto the porch. The crisp morning air, once a relief, now felt like a cold slap. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. My plan was simple. Get to the main road. Walk until I reached the nearest house, the nearest anything. I started down the porch steps, my feet pounding against the old wood. My heart was a drum solo in my chest, every beat a desperate plea for escape. I didn't care about anything else, just away. As I reached the last step, my foot landed on something soft. I looked down. It was a pile of freshly broken twigs arranged in a small, crude circle, just like the one in the attic. And in the center, a single, pristine raven's feather. My breath caught in my throat. It was here, on my porch. It had been here, while I was inside, scrambling to escape. It had been waiting. It had known. And then, from the dense tree line just beyond my small clearing, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle. Not the wind, not an animal. It was a deliberate sound. A slow, rhythmic drag, like something being pulled across the forest floor. Coming closer. My gaze was locked on the stone, on that horrific symbol, the crude stick figure painted in what I was now certain was dried blood. The word mine seemed to vibrate, to hum with an unseen energy, drawing me in, holding me captive. My breath hitched, a shallow, ragged thing caught somewhere in my throat. What could a blade do against something that could move through walls, leave messages, breathe in the darkness? And now, paint. Then, the sunlight, which had been so bright, so reassuringly normal just moments ago, began to dim. Not slowly, like a cloud passing overhead, but abruptly, as if a switch had been flicked. The room wasn't dark, but it was muted. The vibrant golds and greens of the forest outside the window seemed to leach away, replaced by a sickly, bruised twilight. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, stretching, twisting into unnatural shapes. They weren't just shadows anymore, they felt presences, pressing in, watching. And then I heard it again, the scratching. But this time, it wasn't delicate. It was louder, more insistent, and it wasn't coming from the mantelpiece. It was coming from the walls themselves. A frantic, scraping sound, like claws dragging against wood, against plaster, against stone.
It wasn't just one spot, it was everywhere, behind the bookshelf, under the floorboards, in the ceiling above my head. The cabin groaned around me, not with the familiar creaks of an old house settling, but with a deeper, more guttural sound, like a living thing in agony. Or perhaps like a living thing stretching, waking up. My eyes darted frantically around the room, trying to pinpoint the source, to make sense of the impossible. The hunting knife, still clutched in my trembling hand, felt like a feather, useless, absolutely useless. The air grew heavy, thick with that musty organic smell I'd noticed in the attic, but now it was sharper, more pungent, like damp earth mixed with something decaying, something ancient. It filled my lungs, making me cough, a dry, desperate sound that was immediately swallowed by the cacophony of scratching and groaning. The bookshelf, an old, sturdy oak piece that had been in the cabin for decades, suddenly shuddered. A book, titled Forest Lore, tumbled from a shelf, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. As I watched, a dark, viscous liquid began to seep from the crack where the wall met the ceiling, slowly, deliberately, tracing a jagged line down the wallpaper. It wasn't water, it was too thick, too dark. It reminded me, sickeningly, of the substance on the stone. My gaze was drawn back to the mantelpiece, to the word mine. And as I stared, the crude stick figure painted beneath it seemed to shift. Not physically, but perceptually. The two pebble eyes seemed to bore into me, no longer blank, but filled with a malevolent, knowing intelligence. The wide slit of a mouth seemed to stretch, to widen, into a silent, terrifying grin. And then, from the darkest corner of the living room, near the unlit hearth, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It wasn't just a patch of darkness, it had form, a vague, shifting outline. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed to contort and extend in ways that defy anatomy. It flowed rather than walk across the floor, its movement silent, predatory. I couldn't make out details, but the overall impression was of something spindly, elongated, disturbingly similar to the symbol on the stone. Two pinpricks of light, like the doll's eyes, like the stone's eyes, gleamed from what I assumed was its head, fixed on me. It was real. Oh God, it was real. My mind shattered. All pretense of logic, all attempts at rationalization dissolved into pure, primal terror. My legs finally unstuck themselves from the floor, but not to run. They buckled. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, landing hard on the wooden floor. The hunting knife clattered uselessly beside me. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, my vision blurring with unshed tears, with fear. The entity paused a few feet from me, its form still shifting, coalescing like smoke, trying to hold shape.
The scratching in the walls intensified, becoming a frantic drumming, a chorus of unseen claws eager to get out. The cabin groaned louder, the very timbers seeming to scream. Then a voice. Not a sound from the entity's form, but a whisper that echoed in my mind, cold and dry, like rustling leaves in an empty room, yet impossibly loud, filling every corner of my skull. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the meaning was crystal clear, burned directly into my consciousness. You are mine. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, an absolute, undeniable claim. And as the words echoed, the spindly form began to extend a limb, a long, black tendril that stretched towards me, moving with impossible speed, impossible grace. It wasn't reaching for me to harm me, not directly. It was reaching for something else. It reached for my face. My eyes widened in horror. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My mouth was dry, my throat constricted. I thrashed, trying to scramble away, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The tendril touched my cheek, cold and impossibly light, like a spider's silk. But it wasn't just touching, it was tracing. Tracing the outline of my jaw, my nose, my forehead. And as it traced, I felt something else. A connection, a cold, alien presence seeping into my mind, into my very being. It wasn't just claiming the cabin, it was claiming me. It was weaving itself into my thoughts, into my soul. I was no longer an intruder. I was becoming part of its domain, part of it. The last thing I saw before the world began to blur, before the darkness began to consume my vision, was the grotesque, silent grin of the stone and the two pinprick eyes of the shadowy form, gleaming with ancient, triumphant malice. And then the silence returned, deeper, more profound than ever. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with it. The darkness never truly left. It just shifted. It became the new normal. I am here, still, or at least a part of me is. My eyes see, but they are not my eyes. My hands feel, but they are not my hands. The cabin is no longer just wood and stone. It breathes now, a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoes the one I first heard that terrifying night. The silence I craved. It's here, absolute, unbroken. But it's not the peaceful quiet of nature. It's the silence of a tomb, vast and all-consuming, where the only sound is the constant, low hum of its presence, of our presence, intertwining. I watch the forest now, through countless eyes. The trees are no longer just trees. They are extensions, feelers. The wind whispers secrets, not to me, but to us. The word mine no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a truth, an absolute. This place is ours, and I am a piece of it. A memory, perhaps, of what once was. A consciousness observing, unable to act, unable to scream. Sometimes, in the deepest hours, I feel a flicker of my old self, a desperate clawing at the edges of this new reality.
A longing for the crisp air, the stars I used to see, the simple act of chopping wood. But it's quickly subsumed, absorbed back into the vast cold tapestry of what I have become. There is no escape, only integration. So, if you ever seek the quiet, the absolute solitude of the woods, remember this. Remember that sometimes the silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's just waiting to be filled, waiting for you. Have you ever felt it? That sensation of being watched, of something claiming you, not just your space, but your very being? Or is it just the quiet settling in?